She looked directly at Miles, her aged eyes holding a profound, ancient sadness. These Masons and Druids, they were the first to tamper with forces they couldn't control. They paid a terrible price for their ambition. They were forced to flee, leaving behind a legacy of fear and a weakened barrier. And now it seems history is poised to repeat itself. The echoes of their mistake are no longer distant murmurs. They are the screams of a town being consumed from within. The hunger is back, detective, and it has found its willing hands. The location of this nexus, this place where the veil between worlds was said to be thinnest, was not a matter of common knowledge, nor was it marked by any obvious monument. Martha's father, and those before him who understood the terrifying truth, referred to it only in hushed tones as the scar, or the stillness. A grand cathedral or an ancient ruin, but a place of profound, unsettling normalcy that belied its true nature. They spoke of a particular clearing deep within the whispering pines, a place where the trees seemed to grow in unnatural silence, their branches twisted and gnarled as if in perpetual agony. The ground there was said to be perpetually cool, even in the height of summer, and an unnerving lack of animal life was a consistent, chilling indicator. No birds sang in its vicinity, no small creatures scurried through the undergrowth. The very air seemed to absorb sound, creating a pocket of oppressive quiet. This was the place where the first settlers, guided by an ancient, almost instinctual knowledge that echoed the forgotten wisdom of the stone whisperers, had inadvertently or perhaps deliberately created the tear. The rituals employed by these early inhabitants, those who sought to harness or contain the energies of this nexus, were complex and steeped in a lore that blended astronomical observation with earth-based mysticism. They were not the elaborate ceremonies of organized religion, but more primal invocations designed to resonate with the natural frequencies of the land and the cosmos. Martha described fragmented recollections passed down through her lineage, tales of aligning standing stones long since crumbled and reclaimed by the earth, with specific constellations during solstices and equinoxes. There were also descriptions of intricate patterns etched into the soil, mandalas woven from natural materials like pine needles, river stones, and even the shed antlers of deer, all intended to focus and direct the potent, uncontainable energies. The elders believed that these rituals were not about opening the portal in a physical sense, but about thinning the already fragile membrane, about creating a pathway, a siphon for the power that lay beyond. It was a dangerous dance on the edge of oblivion, a desperate attempt to either channel the otherworldly essence for their own purposes or to build a temporary dam against its inevitable overflow. The conviction of the elders was absolute. The portal, or rather the wound it represented, was never truly closed. It was a scar on the fabric of reality, a place where the mundane had been irrevocably breached. They understood that such a fundamental disruption could not simply be stitched up and forgotten. Instead, it festered, a constant, latent vulnerability. Martha's father often spoke of it like a deep, untreated wound that, though no longer bleeding outwardly, remained infected, a breeding ground for unseen decay. The cyclical nature of the disappearances, the town's peculiar atmosphere, the perpetual, almost tangible gloom that often settled over Havendale. These were not mere coincidences or atmospheric anomalies. They were the symptoms, the outward manifestations of the ongoing drain, the subtle seepage of an unnatural influence that had established its roots deep within the land. The unnatural twilight that cloaked the town, a phenomenon that even the most rational minds struggled to explain, was, in their belief, a direct consequence of this breach. It was as if the very light of the sun was being leached away, absorbed by the hungry void that lay just beyond the veil. The portal, therefore, was not a historical footnote. It was a persistent, living wound, a dormant gateway that merely awaited the opportune moment, the confluence of cosmic or terrestrial forces, to wrench itself open once more and unleash its primal horrors upon an unsuspecting world. The elders, Martha explained, didn't speak of a god or a demon in the traditional sense. Their understanding was far more primordial, a concept of an entity that predated such categorizations. They believed that the very act of piercing the veil, of creating the scar, had not merely opened a pathway, but had inadvertently, or perhaps with a terrible, deliberate intent from unseen forces, awakened something that had slumbered for eons. It wasn't a being that walked and breathed, not in a way humanity understood. Instead, it was a consciousness, a pure, unadulterated malevolence that had existed in the spaces between realities, in the cosmic void, waiting. Waiting for a door to creak open, a chink in the armor of existence, and Havendale, with its peculiar geography and the misguided rituals of its first inhabitants, had provided that invitation. "It's like a stain, Detective," Martha's voice, usually steady despite the weight of her knowledge, now trembled with a primal fear that transcended mere academic understanding. "Not a physical stain you can scrub away. It's a stain on the soul of the land. It seeped in, slowly at first, then with a growing hunger. It's not something that invaded Havendale, it's something that Havendale became a part of. The rituals, the very energy of that nexus point, didn't just offer a conduit, they became a cradle, a nurturing ground for this ancient darkness." She paused, her gaze unfocused, as if witnessing the spectral tendrils of this entity reaching out from her mind's eye. They called it the Shadow Eater, the Nameless Hunger, the Void's Breath. But the names are just whispers, attempts by desperate minds to grasp something utterly alien. It doesn't need a name, it just is, and it feeds. This entity, she insisted, was the unseen architect of every tragedy that had ever befallen Havendale. It wasn't a matter of chance or coincidence. The crippling blights that had withered crops generations ago, the strange fevers that had swept through the town with unnerving selectivity, the unexplained accidents that had claimed lives in sudden, brutal fashion, all bore the imprint of its influence. It was a subtle, insidious corruption that permeated the very fabric of life in the valley. The elders had chronicled its manifestations not as divine intervention or natural disaster, but as the calculated machinations of a malevolent intelligence. They saw patterns in the seemingly random misfortunes, a consistent thread of despair and destruction woven through the town's history. "Think of it like this," Martha continued, her hands now clasped tightly, knuckles white. "Havendale is its mouth. The scar is the throat. And it's been slowly, patiently, swallowing the light, the life, the very essence of this place for centuries. Each disappearance, each unexplained event is a morsel. It doesn't act with a sudden, explosive rage, not usually. It's a creeping rot. It whispers in the quiet moments, amplifies doubt, fuels paranoia, and then, when the conditions are right, when the veil is thin enough, it reaches out. It pulls." Her description painted a picture of a predator, ancient and patient, that had found a rich hunting ground and had been methodically expanding its territory, subtly influencing the very minds of its inhabitants to isolate and weaken themselves, making them easier prey. The Elders' Chronicles, Martha revealed, detailed a gradual strengthening of this entity's grip. The early days after the scar was formed, they believed, were marked by a more ephemeral presence, a shadowy influence that could be partially resisted through their rituals and vigilance. But with each passing generation, with each forgotten ceremony, with each new family that arrived in Havendale ignorant of its true nature, the entity grew more powerful, its tendrils reaching deeper into the collective consciousness of the town. The disappearances, once perhaps isolated incidents attributed to the wilderness or misfortune, had become a recurring, predictable pattern. The encroaching twilight, the persistent dampness that clung to everything, the unsettling silence that often descended upon the valley, these were all signs of its increasing dominance. "The more it feeds, the stronger it becomes," Martha stated, her voice dropping to a near whisper, as if the very act of speaking too loudly might draw its attention. "And its appetite isn't limited to Havendale anymore. That's what truly terrifies me. The elders always warned that if left unchecked, if the scar were ever to widen significantly, it wouldn't be content to remain a local predator. It would seek to expand, to spread this suffocating darkness. They believed that the recent surge in activity, the disappearances, the unsettling phenomena that have become more pronounced in the last few years, are not just the entity feasting within its established domain. They are the first signs of it testing its boundaries, of it preparing to reach beyond." Her words were laced with a palpable dread, a premonition that this ancient evil, long content to feed on the isolated community of Havendale, was now actively, deliberately seeking to extend its dominion. It was no longer just about the internal decay of the town, it was about its outward hunger. The subtle manipulation, the psychological erosion, the gradual draining of life and spirit. These were all tactics employed by an entity that understood the long game. It didn't need armies or brute force. It relied on insidious influence, on exploiting weaknesses, on turning communities against themselves, and ultimately on opening the floodgates to allow its true suffocating nature to engulf everything. Martha's terror was not just born of understanding the past. It was a chilling premonition of a future where the scar, once a wound contained, might become a gateway for something truly apocalyptic. The elders had documented the whispers of its ambition, the subtle shifts in its influence, the growing boldness of its actions, all pointing to a single terrifying conclusion. The nameless hunger was no longer content to dine within the valley. It was looking for new worlds to consume. The hum of the fluorescent lights inside the grocery store seemed to vibrate with a low, unsettling thrum, a sound that had always felt slightly off to Martha, even before the whispers from the elders had solidified into a chilling certainty. Now, standing on the damp asphalt of the parking lot, the fog swirling around her ankles like an unwanted shroud, she felt the dissonance amplified 1,000-fold. Her gaze was fixed not on the weathered brick of the Fred Meyer building, but on its garish neon sign, a beacon of consumerism that had, in her eyes, taken on a far more sinister significance.